It is a storm slow, dark, electric gathering strength in the mind of a man whose life had shattered long before he ever stepped into the studio. When Phil Collins wrote this haunting masterpiece in 1980, he wasn't chasing a hit. He wasn't trying to reinvent himself after years with Genesis. He was simply trying to survive the deepest emotional collapse he had ever known. And from that collapse, he created a song that would echo across generations, wrapped in mystery, myth, and a drum break that shook the world. The story begins with silence, not musical silence, but the crushing quiet of a home falling apart. Collins had spent most of the late 70s on the road with Genesis. Touring, recording, performing, his life was a blur of commitments, deadlines, backstage corridors, and hotel rooms. But the more his career rose, the more his marriage to Andrea Bertorelli began to crumble. He missed anniversaries, birthdays, ordinary moments that never came back. And eventually, the distance became irreversible. When Andrea left with their young child, Collins found himself alone in an empty house. Rooms still filled with memories, toys, photographs, letters, and in the middle of that emotional wreckage sat a piano, his only outlet when words failed. Collins later described this period as screaming without sound, a quiet agony that began transforming into music almost by accident. He didn't sit down to write a song. He sat down to release pain. On the piano, he began forming a slow, unresolved chord progression, dark, suspended, heavy. Not a melody, not a structure, just the sound of grief turning into shape. From those chords came fragments of words, not fully formed sentences, but emotional exhalations. If you told me you were drowning, I've been waiting for this moment. I can feel it coming. The lyrics weren't meant to tell a story. They were expressions raw, unconscious, the mind trying to explain a heartbreak it could barely comprehend. Collins has said repeatedly, most of the lines were improvised on the spot. And that's exactly why they feel so haunting. They weren't written, they were released. Phil recorded early demos at his home, using just a roll-in drum machine, its cold, mechanical beat mirroring the numbness he felt. The track was stripped, almost empty. Just a pulse, a voice, and a shadow of something growing underneath. But even in that primitive form, those who heard the demo felt something unsettling, powerful, almost supernatural. It was emotion without explanation. When Collins presented the early version to producer Hugh Padgham, a new chapter began. Padgham was experimenting with a now famous recording technique known as gated reverb, a sharp, explosive sound created when a drum hit was amplified, then suddenly cut off. It was bold, unnatural, shocking. The technique had accidentally emerged during sessions with Peter Gabriel, and Collins had already experimented with it on Intruder. But no one could have predicted what would happen when that sound collided with the tension of In the Air Tonight. The song's arrangement built slowly. The eerie drum machine remained untouched, forming a heartbeat beneath the entire track. Synth layers deepened the darkness. Collins' voice, calm, but boiling with invisible fury, became the centerpiece. But the track still needed something. Something that matched the emotional eruption Collins felt inside. And then came the moment. Late in the sessions, Collins approached the drum kit, this time playing not softly, not experimentally, but with everything he had been holding inside since his marriage collapsed. The sticks came down with force. The drums detonated through the gated reverb effect. And once they played it back in the studio, everyone in the room froze. They had never heard anything like this. Those massive, iconic drum hits didn't just transform the song, they transformed music history. The moment the drums drop is now one of the most recognizable, celebrated, and imitated transitions ever recorded. A moment of emotional release, so powerful that it became a cultural phenomenon of its own. Still, even with the final mix complete, no one predicted what would follow. Because as soon as the song was released, the world began to fill in its own story. People didn't just listen, they searched for meaning. The lyrics were so vague, so emotionally charged, that a myth began to form. The idea that the song was inspired by Collins witnessing a drowning incident, or that he confronted someone responsible for it on stage. Collins has denied this countless times, often with humor, but the legend refused to die. The truth was actually far more painful. The song wasn't about someone else's tragedy. It was about his. In the Air Tonight became Phil Collins' emotional exorcism. Radio stations picked it up instantly. Audiences connected with the tension, the slow burn, the unspoken anger, the sense of something inevitable. For many, it became the soundtrack of heartbreak, betrayal, or unresolved emotion. For others, it simply felt like stepping into a storm that had been building for years. But while the song launched Collins into superstardom, it also signaled a new chapter in his artistic life. He was no longer just the drummer from Genesis. He was a solo artist with a voice that carried the weight of an era, someone who could write pop songs, rock anthems, and devastating confessions with equal force. Over time, In the Air Tonight embedded itself into global culture. Movie directors used it to create tension. TV shows revived it for dramatic effect. Drummers studied it religiously. And comedians, actors, and even sports personalities recreated the drum break in tributes that spanned decades. The song entered the bloodstream of modern music and never left. Yet behind all the fame, all the reinterpretations, all the memes and parodies, the heart of the story remained the same. A man alone at a piano, trying to understand why the most important relationship in his life had shattered. Trying to say everything he couldn't say out loud. Trying to survive the storm inside him. And that's why In the Air Tonight still resonates more than 40 years later, because it wasn't created to be a hit. It wasn't shaped for radio. It wasn't calculated. It was honest. A moment bottled in sound. A wound transformed into art. A feeling thousands of people recognized instantly, even if they didn't know why. Phil Collins didn't design a masterpiece. He simply allowed the truth to escape. And in doing so, he created one of the most haunting, mysterious, and powerful songs ever recorded. A song that doesn't just play, it waits, it breathes, it grows, and then, in one unforgettable moment, it hits with the force of a lifetime.